Whoa, happy Friday. Good morning.
Good morning, Babs.
There's nothing like technical stuff to get you revved up.
I was in the elevator with Harry, and he said, thank God it's Friday. I said, Harry, anytime you see me, it's Friday.
You are listening to the Criminal Justice Insider with Babs, RAWLS-IVY, and Jeff Grant, the voice of, oh, here's our caller. So let me accept this and then, tell him to hold on. Hi, Aaron.
Hello?
Aaron, can you hold on 1 second?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, hold on 1 second. We'll be right back to you in 2 seconds. Okay, so where was I? I know this is comedy this morning.
The voice of Connecticut criminal justice.
Yes, and people are using that too. Like people when they reference us, the voice of criminal justice.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Anyway, we're live. We're streaming at the NewHavenIndependent.org, Facebook Live, YouTube Stream now, Twitter, Twitch, Periscope, Smartcast, and archived on SoundCloud and on the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven website. We are sponsored by the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven.
Now more than ever.
So good morning to Lynn.
And Andrew, hello, our loved one.
Hello, loves. So our guest today is Aaron Kinzel, lecturer at the University of Michigan at Dearborn, who was incarcerated as a youth. And so he's going to come on and talk about, I guess, a bit of his life. He lectures in criminology and criminal justice at the University of Michigan at Dearborn. His teachings and research areas of expertise are education, corrections, and public policy. He's a consultant that has worked nationally on criminal justice reform and including contracts with the U.S. Department of Justice. Ooh, I want to hear about that. Kinzel has visited dozens of correctional facilities throughout the United States and Europe and has worked with over thousands of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated individuals for over 20 years, helping them become law-abiding and productive citizens. Kinzel's passion for these issues arose from his own incarceration as a youth, in which he spent nearly a decade in the carceral state, including several years in solitary confinement. So, welcome, Aaron.
Thank you for having me. Excited to talk with both of you.
I'm excited. So, where do you want to start? Because you have a big story. It's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts.
Oh yeah, we want to hear the story of how you wound up in prison, because I know you and your brother got into some trouble when you were very young.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess just really quickly, the biggest thing that kind of funneled me into the prison system, not to take away my own accountability for my actions, but what it's important, I think, for listeners to understand is that very often crime occurs in a vacuum where environmental impacts, depending on where you grow up, if you live in poverty, certain demographics, your zip code has a big impact on whether or not you're going to commit a crime. So I grew up in an impoverished community. My mama was with a lot of men who were violent criminals. And so as a child, my learning environment is basically filled with all the bad choices. So I'm subjected to a lot of violence. I see a lot of violence in my community, and my mother's abused, I'm abused, and fast forward, by the time I'm 8 years old, I'm getting beaten in my home. My stepfather tries to murder me, attacks my mother constantly.
Sounds like a typical American family. Whew, that's a lot going on, Aaron.
American family, yeah.
That's a lot.
So yeah, it was really tough.
Did people know this?
Go ahead.
Did people know what was happening in your household?
No, nobody really knew. I mean, some people knew, I suppose, in my family, but it's not I guess it was kind of normalized, that violence, and where I grew up. So by the time I'm a teenager, I'm in and out of the juvenile justice system, and that kind of sets the stage for me to later on get involved with my mother's boyfriends who are selling guns and narcotics across state lines. I get wrapped up into things to where now I kind of hated drug dealers when I was a little kid and hated violence, and now I'm becoming a hyper-masculine, aggressive, drug-dealing teenager.
Wow.
So it's kind of a really good shift for me as a kid. So now, by the time I turn 18, this is the pathway to the penitentiary bid. I go out of the state of Michigan. I'm on felony probation for a drug charge, and I get pulled over by law enforcement. I get really nervous. A state trooper comes up to the vehicle during a traffic stop. He's got his hand by his holster. He's acting really weird. He's stepping away from the window of the vehicle, and I'm getting a really bad feeling. I react in an instinctual way. I pull my gun. I shoot out the window. And the
Whoa.
trooper drops to the floor. And as he falls back and drops, he fires a shot above my head. And then out of the corner of my right eye, another individual comes up who I later found out was an undercover officer, and he fires 15 rounds in the back of my car. So bullets are just spraying into the vehicle.
And you don't get hit?
What's that?
You don't get hit?
I do not get hit. So
You
fortunately, myself,
Aaron, are you white?
My girlfriend who was with me.
Are you white?
Are
you white, Aaron? Are you white?
Yeah.
Okay. Because all that gunfire and you didn't get killed?
They tried, Babs, trust me, they tried everything in their power to execute me. Just something happened that day. They were at point blank range. That whole car was sprayed with bullets. And to this day, I don't know what happened. I'm not a believer in a higher power per se. That's just who I am and the experiences I've gone through. But something happened that day that I cannot explain. I don't know if it was God. I don't know if it was a supernatural force. Something saved my life and my girlfriend's life.
Wow. And so what happened? So you go to jail, I suspect.
Yeah, I go on a high-speed chase after that, and then they get me the next day, and I get caught up. I'm an 18-year-old kid, and now I'm facing the attempted murder of a police officer, and I'm looking at the maximum charge, life in prison.
Okay. So you don't do life in prison because you're talking to us. So
absolutely,
who intervened? What intervened to change the trajectory of that?
Yeah, I think the big change came in a really weird place. So like a lot of the men that were there that had spent probably decades of their lives incarcerated, some of whom, many of whom went in very young as teenagers, but they're like in their 40s or 50s now. They've been in prison for a long time. They're long timers, meaning that they're going to spend decades in prison, or lifers, meaning they're never coming home. So a lot of these men became my mentors now in a different way. So now I've got a bunch of former criminals who, like, again, from my childhood, I really perceived most criminals as just violent, abusive, and certainly something that I didn't want to be. But then, ironically, I became one myself. But then these men had evolved, transformed, became what I would call almost like organic scholars. Like, these men were very educated without having formal degrees. They kind of mentored me and taught me about law, helped me fight my criminal case all the way through the court systems at the state and the federal system, and policy, and taught me how to de-escalate violent situations. And I think the other piece of it too was I just kind of grew up and I evolved. Like as a kid, like if you look at academic literature, there's all kinds of research that talks about how like you don't really develop your adult brain until your mid-20s. So like people that are like, when we say 18-year-old kid or 19-year-old kid, I mean, it's literal. Like, we say that for a reason, because we don't let people drink until they're 21 because they're kids, So in my mid-20s is when I started to have different maturity. I'm less impulsive. My brain's fully developed. And then slowly I start to change, I think, and then access to education and literature and all these different things are kind of like swirling around me. And then by the time I turned 28, I was lucky that I was able to get a mandatory parole in the state of Maine where I was locked up. So you do your minimum. There's no parole board. So I had to do 11 straight. I got a little good time. I did just under 10. And then I was released.
Okay. And so what happens?
So when I come home, my whole life is kind of turned upside down. I really can't explain to people. I mean, people that may be listening that have, experienced this, they understand. But everything that you knew before you went inside now has changed. You know, I'm a decade outside of technology. There's new homes that are built. There's new people. My whole community has been kind of disrupted and changed, and I've changed. So it's very stressful, and it's particularly hard for men coming home because we have this sense of men can't cry, men can't be emotional, we can't ask for help. This hyper masculine bullshit that we constantly are fed in society, and we certainly pick up as well. So I'm struggling, honestly, and I think I had a lot of PTSD. A lot of people often connect that with war service and stuff like that, but like PTSD for people coming home from prison, I think is just as powerful as some of our war vets. I mean, a lot of these people have experienced trauma and violence, and that doesn't necessarily go away. So I started off in a community college. So right before I got out of prison, I took a couple college classes, and that really made me hungry to go forward with my education. But by the time I come home, I try to find jobs. Nobody will hire me. And it's not even the point that the severity of my crime actually ever came out, because I never really got a conversation. Once you check that box, and that's for everybody across the U.S. that has any type of criminal conviction, you check that box, nobody, it's like you're damaged goods, like you have leprosy. Nobody wants to talk to you. So I tried getting jobs. I could never find employment. So I'm in a community college. I get my associate's degree in 2 years with honors, and then I go back to school. I'm like, well, maybe I need a bachelor's degree to prove myself. I get my bachelor's degree in less than a year. After that, with honors, again, nobody will hire me. I'm still trying to find employment, and I'm also kind of still dealing with my own personal demons, the PTSD, the social acclimation, and just trying to navigate really what the hell's going on with me. And then I finally decide, well, I'll go get a master's degree at the University of Michigan. I get enrolled in that program, finish up in less than 2 years. And now it's at the point where I'm almost 6 years home. I'm still on parole. Cannot find a job for the life of me. I put in a few hundred applications in random places, and I even tested the waters a couple times and thought, like, well, maybe if I don't check that box, I wonder what would happen with my same credentials and work ethic. And lo and behold, a couple of times when I changed that box, I get called in for interviews.
Wow.
You know, it's just really interesting where, and then by then, once I have an interview goes great. End of the process, I start filling out paperwork. I recheck that box now the right way and start having a conversation. And it's that same old song and dance. We'll call you, don't call us. You know, and so many millions of Americans face this every day of their lives. And honestly, I just think it's discriminatory in nature. I think formerly incarcerated people should be a protected class, just like, age, gender, race, all these different things where we have a mechanism to try to circumvent that process.
Okay. So what are you doing for money? How do you sustain? And how do you keep the faith in all of this?
Yeah. So fortunately, after I got my master's degree, I got into a PhD program. And then, like, after year 6, I get my first job offer, which was really weird. I'm at a national university, Western Michigan University out here. And I'm there for one semester. I do a guest lecture in a faculty member's class. And just for the first time, I joke and say I come out of the convict closet. I started talking about my prison history in front of a public audience. And I was able to kind of motivate and encourage some students. They really enjoyed the presentation. The faculty member really enjoyed the presentation, and she mentioned that she would be going on a sabbatical, which is basically just kind of a leave for absence to kind of get a vacation as a tenured faculty member. And she said, would you like to teach my intro section while I'm gone? I'm like, holy shit. I don't know how to teach a class. She's like, nobody does. That's just, everybody starts somewhere. So I get a section of Introduction to Criminal Justice. That's my first job. Like, I don't check a box. I'm just hired on the spot. And then after that, first class, I get really good teaching evaluations. and I was rehired by that university. I ended up dropping out of their PhD program because I just felt sociology was not the connection.
Mm-hmm.
Where you got these old white dudes like Karl Marx and Neil Durkheim talking about how crime is a social fact from well over 100 and some years ago. And maybe I was arrogant and just kind of thought, well, I kind of lived this as a kid, so why do I need to be reading something 100 years old to understand that crime is, deeply embedded in communities?
Yeah, I'm an old white dude. I'm an old white dude, Aaron. So be careful.
Yeah. Be careful.
Yeah, I'm an old white dude.
Did you write a book 100 and some years ago, Jeff?
No, well, maybe in a past life. So keep going.
So I go back to the University of Michigan, Dearborn, and I get into a doctorate education program.
Mm-hmm.
I stay on at Western as faculty for 3 years, and then I meet my current boss, Judge Donald Shelton, who's a former circuit court judge out of Washtenaw County here in Michigan. He just retired a few years ago. He becomes the director of this criminal justice program on campus.
Mm-hmm.
We have a weird conversation one day, and then I come out to him about my background, and he initially kind of laughs, and I'm like, kind of got pissed off. I'm like, what's so funny? And he's like, do you think that, your background is going to stop you from working here? And I said, yeah, of course it will. And he's like, well, it's not going to stop me from hiring you.
Wow.
So I honestly thought this guy was just, blowing smoke up my ass. But then, like, true to his word, months later, he said, put in an application. I'll give you thoughtful consideration. A couple months later, I get hired, and I've been at the University of Michigan for the last 4 years teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like, in a weird way, I was kind of like gifted this career trajectory without any planning, really dumb happenstance luck. But now it's become my career. And then in part of the faculty stuff that's kind of branded me as an expert, and the knowledge base that I earned inside and in the community, to where I do consulting engagements, speaking engagements, work with correctional officials, work with people that are in prison. Going back in prison is the hardest thing ever for me. I never thought I would go back inside in a million years, but now it's under like, I control the situation to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
I go in there to kind of like motivate and help people, and it's just become a passion of mine.
Aaron, I just want to tell you something. You're on terrestrial radio. You got to be careful with your language while you're on the radio, if that's okay.
Okay.
No.
Sorry.
So Aaron, it seems to me, because I follow you on social media, and it seems to me you have a very rich program at University of Michigan Dearborn. I mean, there's something going on there every day.
Yeah.
I mean, so is
sure.
that, are you in charge of all that criminal justice programming?
No, I'm not. My boss is, but like what's unique about my job is that I'm able to kind of like just like take the reins of the horse and do pretty much whatever I want, as long as I can find funding for events or I make connections in the community. I'm able to bring people who are experts or people that have been directly impacted by the justice system on campus, create events collaboratively with other students. We have a lot of privilege on that campus as far as resources, so we're able to do a lot of things very frequently. And what I love about my job is that I'm able to give my students this experiential learning opportunity in which they're not just reading some textbook where they're getting all the basic stats and trying to memorize facts. They're living and breathing different pieces of the criminal justice system, which I think is extremely important.
Mm-hmm. So all this experience, and because you've been on both sides, you've been inside, you're outside. So what do you think that the criminal justice is getting right? What are they getting wrong? How should we be looking at this? How should we be interrupting the prison to pipeline to prison pipeline? Like, what are your thoughts on those kinds of things? Because you get to interact with a lot of people. You spend a considerable amount of time inside. So you must have gleaned some things out of all of that experience.
Yeah. So, well, the first thing that I say, and often shocks people, I'm sure both of you heard, the criminal justice system is broken, right?
Yeah, we probably know that.
Yeah. Okay. You've heard that before.
Yeah.
I often tell people in public spaces the justice system is not broken. And then people kind of like get all wide-eyed and like look at me like, what do you mean? Well, if you really think about it historically and how the system is designed, it's doing exactly what it was intended to do, which is to control, surveil, marginalize, and impress certain individuals.
Yes. And
More
by
often
certain
than not,
individuals,
either
you mean, and by certain individuals, you mean specifically, what does that mean?
specifically blanket board anybody that's living in poverty, and particularly with the disparate impact on communities of color, Native Americans, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and now we have immigrants getting rolled into that as well. That's the new expansion of the carceral state. So what the government has done is designed this very well-oiled machine that is controlling these individuals that I've mentioned. So very often, or not very often, it's extremely rare that you see anybody that's very wealthy go into the system and be subjected to these unjust policies, like cash bail, for instance. I think is the worst thing that we have in our local system. That is kind of like the funnel or the feeder for the larger prison system. If you can't afford $100 or $500 for bail, you sit in the county jail. I think one of the worst stories, I'm sure you're both familiar with Khalif Browder.
Yes.
This young African-American man, like his story is very reminiscent of things that I experienced in the county jail. But the difference between me and Khalif, Khalif was only a 16-year-old kid. African-American boy, grew up in the Bronx, probably had it a lot worse in his community than I did. And he didn't have just the basic amount of money to get out of jail for a damn backpack. Like he was never even proven guilty. So he sat 3 years at Rikers Island for a crime that he didn't even commit, in and out of solitary confinement, tried to commit suicide, all this trauma. And that's what we're doing to people in this country every single day. Khalif is not unique in that aspect, but what is interesting about his story, when he comes home, is, like he gets stressful, he can't reacclimate to society. And again, this is an innocent young man that has been funneled into the system, and he can't deal with that. Nobody's giving him resources or opportunities. So now what does he do? He commits suicide out of his mama's window. And I think it's just heartbreaking that we allow that to happen in the system. So what I hope that we can do, Babs, is like, we need to look at that. We need to own that the criminal justice system has lots of elements of racism. I mean, let's be real. We try to hide that very often. We try to act like, we've never had the genocide of Native Americans in this country, enslavement of African Americans. We still have slaves in this country now. Most people don't realize under the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution, when we freed African Americans from the plantations in the South, we re-enslaved them through this convict leasing system that says now you can only be enslaved by the state if you've been duly convicted of a crime.
Right.
And now that's expanded beyond black bodies, it's brown bodies, poor white bodies. Anybody that can't afford to get out of this trap is now a perpetual slave of the state, and corporations are making trillions of dollars every year off it. That's why it'll never stop until we get money out of politics. Like, I think that's the deep root of the problem we have with the criminal justice system is capitalism.
Yeah.
This whole country is being fed by corporations. Our politicians are all bought and paid for by campaign contributions, but it's legal, because we call bribery a different thing, where you can have hundreds of thousands of dollars campaign as if that doesn't influence legislation or your vote. Come on. I think it's a joke. So until we fix the political spectrum and the money going into politics, I really don't think we're going to have any strong headway on changing school to prison pipeline, our access to our educational system for many youth, that when they don't have opportunities, that's what most people don't understand. Rich white kids, if they are put into an environment where they have no schooling, no public health, blight in their communities, guess what's going to happen? Just like poor black and brown youth, they're going to create illicit economies. So what I really hope people understand is that this is all of our problems. This is not like one racial demographic or one religious or one immigration. It's all of us are being impacted because the vast majority of us are not multimillionaires that are controlling this country.
So Aaron, did you spend time in the county or in some jail disposition of your case? I mean, before you were arraigned, before you were tried, before whatever did happen. Did you experience that personally?
Yeah. So when I first got caught the day after the shootout had started, I was taken into custody. My bail was set at $100,000, so certainly I didn't have 10% of that. I didn't have 10 grand. But all honesty, like, this is something I want people to think about. There should have been no bail in my case. Like, as a kid, I was upset that my bail was $100,000. The severity of the incident that I caused, it should have been very simple. It shouldn't have been about if I had money or not. It should have been, am I an immediate threat to public safety? And was there enough evidence to support that? Absolutely. I needed to be held until we kind of figured out what to do with me.
Mhm.
But if I had financial means to get myself out of that situation, I could have been wreaking havoc on the community.
Mm.
So that's something to think about where,
That's
what
a-
we're doing.
that's-
So yeah, I spent about 20 months in jail, Jeff, as a
Mhm.
pretrial detainee.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty honest of you to sort of admit that. I don't know too many people who could admit that particular part of it. That you could have been, you probably were a threat to community until you figured out that, these are the forces that are impacting you to change your life. But until that moment,
Yeah.
you needed to be locked up.
So Aaron, when you say
Absolutely.
you spent 10 years, does that include the 20
Mhm.
months or not?
Yes, that included. So like from so the pretrial detainee, I was 20 months, and then the rest of the time was spent in mostly maximum security prison, sometimes supermax, and then really at the far end of my bid, I was in a pre-release facility.
But you spent a bunch of time in solitary. Is that true?
Yeah. Most of the time actually was when I was in the county jail for that 20 months. I would say probably about 2/3 or 3/4 of that time was in segregation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what kind of, really makes this deep connection with myself and Khalif is that, I was an angry young man too. The difference between us, again, Khalif was innocent. I was guilty as, heck, but like, we were both just kids. I was an 18-year-old kid. He's 16, and we're just like being controlled and power over us. So we fought back against that,
Yeah.
and what people don't understand in jail, like it's suffering.
Mm-hmm.
It is hell on earth. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and then solitary, Jeff, like on top of that, like it's the deepest depths of hell.
Mm-hmm.
Like you are sitting in there 23, 24 hours a day with no access to food, water sometimes, human contact. We're social human beings. You just suffer. You have no reading. You have no TV. You're sitting there and just rotting. And I did a lot of like psychedelics when I was a little bit younger. I was tripping on acid and
Mm-hmm.
magic mushrooms, you name it. Like I had more profound and very negative hallucination experiences while incarcerated, completely sober, but being deprived of, like there's times when I've gone without food an entire day as punishment.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something that you read in a textbook, but it's something that does occur. And I'm not trying to blanket brush create that all correctional staff are evil monsters, but there are some of them that do grimy stuff, and same with police, but they're just never held accountable
Right.
for that behavior.
So
It's kind of like they often get upset at criminals because there's this code of silence on the streets and in prison, and yet law enforcement and correctional staff or other government officials have that same code of honor. In which
Exactly.
if a good individual in government sees the bad one doing something, they either be silent or help cover it up. And that's not right. I think as a civil servant, you should be held to a higher standard than the average citizen. And yet we don't hold them to any standard. That's the unfortunate reality.
So Aaron, let me ask you a couple of questions about your situation. So when you fired your weapon, did you hit that policeman?
No, I did not. No one was injured in that confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So I fired out the window. The officer that dropped back, he was not struck.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, the 15 rounds that was fired from the other individual, and then the one officer that went down that fired towards me.
Yeah.
15 rounds total pointed at my direction and my girlfriend. None of us were injured.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened to your girlfriend? Did she did she stick around? Did she visit you? Did you marry her?
Yep.
What happened?
No, nothing like that. She created a bunch of different statements initially when they took her into custody with me, saying that, I had no intent to harm anyone. There was never any, because they kept asking her, was there a plan to do this? Was there this, and that? She said there was never a plan. We never talked about this. This was just kind of like a random occurrence. Later on, when I eventually went to trial, the state had convinced her to become a witness. and threatened to charge her as a co-conspirator if she did not testify against me. And then, lo and behold, very much like many other times we have in the criminal justice system, her story changes. But yet she's still credible. She said, I never tried to kill anybody 3 times with 3 different officers in the beginning of the story, but now at trial, she comes forward, changes her mind, and that she comes up with a very scripted story of how I intended to kill this state trooper.
So,
And I think that helped to convict me just by her statement. And again, this was all orchestrated by the apparatus of the state.
so how do you talk about this in your capacity of what you do? Like, how do you share this with decision makers and lawmakers and students? Like, how do you share this story? Not so much as an allegory tale, but as one coming from someone who is white, who has come through a great deal. Because they can't make a decision or a determination about you when you walk into a room. You have to actually tell your story. Because there's there's no sense of, he must be whatever, because Black people, when they walk into a space, there's an assumption.
There's a preconceived notion of bias immediately. Absolutely.
So how do you tell the story? How do you talk to people?
I just kind of like going to these spaces, and if I'm in class or I'm with government officials, I'm dressed up in a suit, I look nice. I'm not like I am now at home, which is my day off from work. I'm just in, my boxers here, just walking around. But like I tell them, they don't see all my tattoos. I'm completely covered in tattoos, so that's certainly a bias too. So like they just see me as some other white guy, and I'm articulate and I'm able to explain some different policies, and then I throw into them like this personal narrative. So I quote some, different things like, this is what's happening. And by the way, not only do I know this from an academic lens or a policy lens, my narrative is, connected to this. And then what I want them to understand, BABZ, is that I'm not unique in this. So many people, I don't care who you are, if you're Black, white, brown, it doesn't matter. If you are in an environment that emphasizes violence, there's poverty, there's lack of opportunity. I don't care who you are, racial background, religious background. A vast majority of people will become involved in illegal activity. That's not that they're just bad people. That's what we got to understand. It's that you're put in circumstances in which sometimes you make, honestly, it's a rational choice to sell drugs in some communities. And that may sound shocking to people, but like when you have no opportunity to feed your kids and make a living, that happens for everybody. But it just we as a society blame it all on urban environments. Like where I am here in Michigan, we put it all on the city of Flint, in Detroit, where it's predominantly African American people, where it's easy for cops to go into a community and kind of like go around a certain block that is just devastated by poverty and say, oh, well, he's selling drugs, this guy's a gangbanger, this guy's this, and we demonize them. And yet in white rural communities where there's poverty, there's the same thing going on, but there's not a million cops going around scooping up. So that's why there's a lot less white people in the system. But white folks are committing just as much crimes when they're impoverished as Black and brown people.
And the underlying issue is poverty, right? It's your case you're making is it's poverty. You lay poverty on top of anybody, this is what's going to happen regardless of color.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so that's something I think they find shocking, that they see, an educated white man telling them that this is not a Black or brown problem. This is not an immigrant problem. And I think, honestly, Babs, I think it kind of shakes them up and makes them think like, wow, how can this, educated white man in a suit have been in prison for 10 years and committed violence and almost murdered a police officer and did all this crazy, and yet I've evolved and changed too. So I think the transformation and the capacity for change for so many people in the system is apparent, but like we don't give people that opportunity. When they come home, your felonies are forever. Like the only
don't
reason
I
I'm
know
here
it?
right now,
I know it.
I mean, it's just crazy. Like the only reason I'm here is 2 things: kind of dumb luck. And my family, not my parents, because they were the ones involved in criminal, but my grandparents that were working class, like my granddad's a disabled World War II vet. He's like 92. he helped me co-sign for a home when I came out.
Wow.
He helped me co-sign for a vehicle, and he doesn't have lots of means, but he was able to give me a few $100, $1,000 here and there, which was not a lot of money, but it was enough to get me started. So many people don't have that in their community, so of course they have to go back to crime. Of course they recidivate. Like just like me, when I had hundreds of times I'm trying to get a job, I'm begging for employment, and I'm very highly skilled at that point. Nobody's giving me a chance. But thankfully, I had that family to help be that buffer to where eventually 6 years later, who can really wait for like 5 or 6 years though? Like I was struggling.
Well, not if you're trying to feed yourself, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have 5 or 6 days, maybe.
So what I'm hearing is a couple of things. That community support or support from the community is critical for people's ability to sort of succeed up and out. Like it's not enough to turn somebody loose. You gotta put some things in place so that they can. Yeah.
So we've got to stop thinking about we got to get this punitive mindset out of our hearts and our minds. We spend anywhere between $30,000 to $50,000 annually per prisoner.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we can spend that type of money to incarcerate someone, to control them, to subjugate them to torture, why can't we, when they come home, spend a few $1,000s just to reacclimate them to society? It's not a handout. It's not. People create this social welfare demon, which doesn't even exist. The real welfare queens in this country have suits on, are in Congress, are in big corporations. Amazon is probably the biggest corporate welfare that we have. So we got to get away from that. So if you give people an opportunity and a chance, like housing, you can illegally you can't get housing as a convicted felon.
Yeah.
You can't get a job. Like, so think about it. Why do we wonder, like, when people come home, oh, they're scumbags, they're just criminals? No, you literally bar them with 44,000 collateral consequences of conviction that say you cannot do A through the other 43,999 things. and we wonder why our recidivism rates are roughly 83%, meaning 83% go back after roughly a 9-year period, because there's no structural programs for assistance or stigma, the social act, the trauma that people go through. We don't help with any of that. We'll spend millions of dollars to incarcerate you, but we won't give you $100 to help you out when you come home. That's just ridiculous. That decreases public safety. That's why we have more crime in our communities, because we're not breaking the cycle. We're just saying, we're going to punish you. You've been a bad boy. You're going to sit here in this cage, and when you come out, you're going to be a good boy. So if you're not, you're a scumbag, and we're going to lock you back up again. And that's just wrong. We have the evidence that supports that it's wrong. We've known this for decades, since mass incarceration started 50 years ago, or even back before that, with the convict leasing. Like, we know what we're doing is wrong. That's why I say it's not broken, it's intentional.
Yeah.
It's the government and people in power that want to control the masses, which is most of us are in poverty or working class, while the elites just kind of like drain us for resources. And we have to subjugate some people to let them know, you better keep working that 9-to-5 job, or you're going to be like them. You're going to be locked up in that cell. It's just a mechanism of terror, I think.
So, Aaron, where are you now in your life? I mean, are you married? Do you have kids? How in terms of your own norms, how much have you come back into assimilated society?
Go
ahead.
When I first came home, I did get married. That didn't work out the best. I was married for almost 9 years, and I've been home 12 years now. I got a divorce 3 years ago. I have a beautiful baby girl. She's 8 years old. Unfortunately, she's in France. I married an immigrant woman, and in the beginning, it was awesome. It was great. We both had our demons that we weren't really able to explore and come together, and I think we were just dramatically different people. But I think from my end, my problem, I don't want to get too much in her issues, but like, my issue was the trauma that I had faced in prison. I wasn't able to open up to my wife. I was very distant when she needed me emotionally and physically. When we got in any type of an argument, I would disconnect from that because of the trauma that I've been through my entire life, and I never understood, honestly, until the last 3 or 4 years, that I've really been studying trauma a lot more as part of an academic lens, that I've been understanding, like, wow, these are some symptoms of PTSD. These are some things that are occurring and help destroy my marriage. Fortunately, I have a great relationship with my daughter, even though she's in France now. She spends summers with me. I go visit her in Europe a couple times a year.
Wow.
Hence, like in the intro, where I study European criminal justice systems now while I'm over there, go to a lot of the prisons. They do things dramatically different in Europe than they do here in the United States. So I think now I feel kind of normal somewhat. But like my hypothesis is this: every year you spend in the criminal justice system, you need that many years when you come home just to kind of get like a rough, homeostasis back. Like but I still have a lot of damage and demons, Jeff. Like there's so much stuff that I haven't completely processed. I'm a lot better today, 12 years home, than I was, when I first came back. But like I think it's a lifelong thing where when you're subjected to trauma, and whether that's self-imposed or you see trauma or you're committing whatever it may be, I think that this never goes away. You can process it and heal to an extent, but like deep down, it's always there. So I think I'm doing a lot better now, but like my relationships and friends I have now, I think are a pivotal part of my recovery per se, like and feeling normal and being like a part of it. Now I'm giving back by helping my community, influencing government officials, working with students to empower them to kind of like stand up to injustice in their communities. So I feel like I'm doing all the right things now.
Yeah.
Wow. Any chance of a book or made for TV or a movie?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought that, like, I would love to. Like, I'm finishing up my dissertation now, which is also kind of like a book.
Yeah.
I'm so
Oh, yeah.
stressed out about that.
What's your dissertation topic?
I think
What's your dissertation topic?
my dissertation is this conceptual framework that I created from my own experiences in prison. I'm calling it carceral consciousness and carceral pedagogy. So the consciousness piece is really looking at how people that are in these prison or carceral spaces develop this deep understanding of the system and their peers and people that have been marginalized and oppressed in society. And they have, and through the pedagogy model, they have the capacity, even though a lot of them are uneducated or lack knowledge. Ignorance is not stupidity; it's just the lack of knowledge.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of people that may be ignorant in the system. It's just because they've never been taught it. They come from horrible school systems. But they have the ability to teach each other. I think a lot of these men that did long terms and life in prison helped transform me and taught me about law and policy and all these things. So I think there's this organic phenomenon that's going on. So I'm going to tell my narrative and my experiences, kind of like, where Hunter Thompson did that ethnography where he went out with the Hells Angels.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but he kind of like went with them, did stuff. Like I'm in that environment. So I'm telling my story, but, connected to all the people I was around. And then now I'm home. I'm interviewing other formerly incarcerated people who've done pretty big time in prison. And I'm finding very similar patterns from my story to theirs. So the people that really develop this carceral consciousness, as I call it, to where they have this self-awareness and understanding deeply of the criminal justice system are now coming out and becoming, activists and advocates. Like Jeff, I think you're an example, like your connections with the system and addiction, like now you are able to come from that dark place when you were younger to share with other people and be an advocate for change. I mean, is that a correct assumption? Or
Yeah, I think Babs and I both do that daily. But I think we agree with you that once you've been through the system, and some of us are more institutionalized than others, and find it hard to reacclimate in a way that we can survive kind of normal society, for years. I mean, I've told the story on this broadcast before, but for years, in order to go to the bathroom, I had to go up to the Shell station because I was so, because I was so institutionalized.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. But what's great though about that is that I think eventually at some point you understood that, right? So I think that's what started to break you away from that,
I think
right?
that's
you were
right.
able to understand that there was that connection to that carceral space, and now you're able to process it and hopefully help to advocate and uplift the voices of others who maybe are not at that point yet, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's exactly right.
It has been a pleasure
Okay.
talking to you, Aaron Kinzel. I am.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the level of authenticity and
I agree.
sincerity in your conversation today. I hope you come back and talk to us and let us know how it goes. Plus, when you graduate, we want a shout out.
Yeah, Aaron, how do people get in touch?
Maybe a year from now, I'll definitely consider that. Yeah, we're getting closer.
Aaron, how do people get in touch
Thank
with
you
you?
both for what you do and bringing these issues to light, and giving people like myself that have been directly impacted that voice, because very often we come from voiceless places and in the shadows. So
Yeah.
these stories need to be.
And that is the point.
So, Aaron, how do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, I have a website, atkinzel.com, and all my social media tags are also atkinzel.
Mhm.
I'm on all the Twitter, Snapchat, Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it. Just follow me and kind of see what I've got going on in my community. Again, I share
There's a
other
lot.
people's stories and bring other
All right.
people, into these spaces and public discussions, so we can kind of help change and transform the system from this really oppressive regime that I think it is right now.
Yep.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaron.
And I look forward to your success.
Yeah, God bless you, man.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
That was a good conversation. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, he's a very forthright guy.
Yeah.
He means well. So, do we have time to talk about a couple of things coming up or no?
Quickly.
Quickly. Our good friend Larice Harvey is getting an award
Yes.
at the OIC New Britain. What day is
Yeah.
that?
I don't know, but I saw it posted somewhere.
Oh yeah, it's coming up soon. I don't have the date, but it's certainly on Facebook. On I sent you the announcement on October 30th. Jackie Pulverari and I are speaking
Great.
at Western Connecticut State University. The beautiful Marilyn Kane and her husband George Kane have invited us to speak there.
Mm-hmm.
So that should be a little rallying point for people in Connecticut. And next week I will be at Rich Roll Live in the audience, but I will be at Rich Roll Live in Los Angeles. Supporting
What is
him.
that?
Well, Rich Roll was the podcast I was on.
Oh, Rich Roll.
Yeah, Rich Roll, yeah.
I just like, what is Rich Roll?
No,
But
he was the podcast I was on, and he
Okay.
has his first live podcast in front of 1,000 people.
Oh,
and
good.
So
Well, that should be you like that kind of thing, so it would be good.
Oh yeah, I don't go out of the house much, Babs, but for this one I'm going out.
Well, thank you for that. All right, so we gotta get out of here. But our next guest in October is Charlie Grady.
Charlie
Grady and I go way back.
Oh, do you?
When I was a kid, one of my early jobs as a kid was I was the receptionist for Lee Partiker, the car dealership, and he was a car salesman.
You're kidding. This guy's got history, but
this was like 40 years ago. Like I was still in high school.
Yeah.
And they hired me.
Charlie's with the FBI.
I know. Listen, we go way back. He's an actor. So yeah, so I've known him a long time. So it'd be really nice to see him.
And I do believe he's bringing some of his hang time guys here.
Oh, nice.
So
well, it'd be good to see him. I have not seen him in many, many years, so it'd be great to see him.
Yeah, he's a beautiful guy.
So October 4th, 9:00, we'll be back at Criminal Justice Insider with Charlie Grady, outreach specialist for the Connecticut FBI Community Outreach Program, and some members of Hang Time.
Yeah.
Woo! All right, so we gotta go. I'm on my way out.
All right, Babs. We are sponsored by
the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven.
Now more than ever.
Thank you, Andrew Kaplan, for always being supportive.
And Lynn Springer. And love you, Babs.
Love you too, Jeff Grant.
And till next time.
We'll be back. Yep. Thank you, Harry. Woo.